The Concordate Assembly Hall stretched upward, like a cathedral designed to humble gods. Captain Crystal Jong stood at humanity's designated platform. Positioned, she noted with careful neutrality, a full 3 tiers below the central dais, where the elder species held court. Above her, the Sarathi delegation occupied platforms that gleamed with bioluminescent confidence. To her right, the crystalline Thex representatives refracted the chamber's ambient light into patterns that spoke of millennia navigating galactic politics. And directly ahead, dominating the central position like a predator surveying lesser creatures, the Vreskoth hegemony's delegation platform rose on columns of dark metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Crystal adjusted her dress uniform's collar with fingers that betrayed none of the uncertainty coiling in her chest. 23 years in Earth's naval service had taught her to maintain composure under fire. Diplomatic fire, she was learning, burned just as hot as the plasma variety. The Concordate recognizes the newest provisional member. The Sarathi speaker's voice carried through the chamber with the kind of musical condescension one might use when addressing a particularly slow child. Captain Zhang, humanity's delegate. Please present your status report. The pause before delegate lasted just long enough to remind everyone in the chamber that humanity lacked the seniority to field an actual ambassador. Crystal touched the control interface built into her platform's lectern, projecting Earth's expansion data into the holographic display sphere that dominated the chamber's center. Thank you, Speaker. Earth continues establishing its presence in Concordate space according to approved guidelines. Our 3 colony expeditions, the Mayflower II, New Horizon, and Promise, are currently en route to the Outer Terrace systems. Total civilian population aboard: 50,000 individuals representing the Outer Terrace. The interruption came from above, from the Vreskoth platform where Hegemon Prince Vreskthor rose to his full height. Crystal had reviewed the files on Vreskoth physiology: bipedal, heavily muscled, with chitinous plates covering vital areas and faces that evolution had shaped into permanent expressions of predatory contempt. The files hadn't prepared her for the visceral impact of that contempt directed at her specifically. Those systems fall within hegemony territorial claims. Crystal kept her voice level. The Concordate Territorial Committee approved humanity's settlement proposal 8 months ago. The Outer Terrace was classified as unclaimed space, beneath the resource threshold for beneath our interest. Vreskthor corrected, mandibles clicking in what the cultural briefings identified as amusement. Not beneath our sovereignty. There is a difference, Captain. One your species should learn before presuming to expand beyond your single primitive system. The chamber fell silent. Crystal felt the weight of dozens of species' attention measuring her response. This was a test, she understood. Not of humanity's claim to the Outer Terrace. The Vreskoth obviously didn't care about those resource-poor systems. This was about establishing humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy, about teaching the newest member what all the others had already learned. The Vreskoth set the rules, and everyone else lived by them, or didn't live at all. With respect, Hegemon Prince, Crystal said, each word precisely calibrated, the Territorial Committee's authority derives from the Concordate Charter, which all member species, including the hegemony, signed and ratified. If the Vreskoth wish to challenge that authority, the proper venue is wherever the hegemony says it is. Vreskthor's claws scraped against his platform's railing, the sound echoing through the chamber like blade on stone. Your species arrived in this galaxy 3 of your years ago with a handful of crude vessels and technology that barely qualifies as faster-than-light travel. You have no colonies, no military presence beyond your homeworld's immediate orbit, no achievements that justify concordate membership. The fact that you were granted even provisional status remains a mystery that many of us question. Crystal noticed movement from one of the lower platforms, the Quillen Collective's delegation. Insectoid beings whose compound eyes reflected her image in fractured multiplicity. Ambassador Quillick's antennae twitched in what the briefings identified as sympathetic distress, but the Quillen remained silent. They always remained silent when the Frescath spoke. Everyone did. Humanity appreciates the Concordate's recognition, Crystal said, refusing to acknowledge the insult. We understand our junior status and are committed to proving our value as productive members of... Productive? Vraskthor's mandibles spread wide, displaying rows of serrated teeth. You crawl between stars at velocities that embarrass even the Quillen. Your registered fleet consists of fewer than 200 vessels, most of which our intelligence classifies as lightly armed merchant craft. You export nothing we cannot produce better ourselves, and import everything you need to maintain your single-world civilization. Tell me, Captain Zhang, what exactly does humanity produce besides amusing displays of unearned confidence? The chamber rippled with what might have been laughter from some species, nervous silence from others. Crystal maintained her expression, but her fingers found the small data chip in her uniform pocket, the one containing deployment orders she'd hoped never to use. The chip felt warm against her fingertips, or perhaps that was just her imagination. We produce survivors, Hegemon Prince. The words emerged quieter than she'd intended, carrying weight that silenced the chamber's ambient noise. Humanity has survived challenges that would have broken lesser species. We've earned our place here, and we'll prove it through our actions, not our rhetoric. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Vraskthor's face. Not respect, certainly, but perhaps a brief reevaluation of the small human standing 3 tiers below him. Then the moment passed, and his mandibles clicked again. Survivors, he repeated, tasting the word like spoiled meat. Yes, I suppose cockroaches are survivors as well. Very well, Captain. Humanity may play at colonization in the outer terrace. The hegemony has no interest in systems that offer so little strategic value. Consider it our gift to the Concordate's newest charity case. The session continued for another hour, but Crystal heard little of it. She maintained her position, nodded at appropriate moments, and even contributed brief comments when called upon. But her mind remained fixed on 3 ships carrying 50,000 civilians toward territory the Frescath hegemony had just publicly claimed as beneath their interest. Beneath their interest, but not beneath their sovereignty. After the session concluded, Crystal made her way through Apex Prime's diplomatic quarter toward the human delegation's suite. The station's architecture reflected its purpose. Designed by the Concordant's founding species to accommodate dozens of different environmental requirements, resulting in corridors that shifted temperature, atmosphere, and gravity every few hundred meters. She'd learned to navigate the transitions without conscious thought, her augmented physiology adjusting to each zone's demands. Captain Zhang. She turned to find Ambassador Quillick approaching from a side passage, moving with the quick, nervous energy characteristic of his species. The Quillen stood roughly her height, but massed considerably less, all delicate limbs and translucent chitin that revealed the bioluminescent organs beneath. Ambassador. Crystal kept her voice neutral, aware of the surveillance systems that monitored all diplomatic district interactions. I wish to express... Quillick's antennae trembled. Admiration for your composure today. The Hegemon Prince's behavior was uncalled for. The Hegemon Prince was establishing dominance, Crystal said. Standard primate behavior, really. We have similar patterns on Earth. You compare the Vreskath to Earth primates? Quillick's mandibles parted in what might have been surprise or horror. I compare all species to Earth creatures when trying to understand their psychology. It helps maintain perspective. Crystal studied the Quillin, noting the way his compound eyes kept darting toward the corridor Vraskthor had taken after the session. You wanted to say something during the territorial discussion about the outer terrace. Quillick's bioluminescent organs pulsed in patterns that might have been distress. The Vreskath do not easily accept challenges to their authority. Even symbolic challenges, even over territory they consider worthless. Are you warning me about my colony ship's ambassador? I am. Quillick's antennae drooped, expressing concern for a fellow species that does not yet fully understand galactic realities. The hegemony has not lost a military engagement in over 300 standard years. They maintain that record through overwhelming force and willingness to use it without hesitation. Your 3 ships carry civilians. Yes? Families? 15,000 children among the total. Crystal kept her voice steady despite the cold weight settling in her chest. The outer terrace systems offer agricultural opportunities that Earth desperately needs. Population pressure on our homeworld requires expansion, and the Concordat approved. The Concordat approves many things. Quillick moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that his translator rendered as barely audible. The Concordat does not enforce its approvals against Vreskath interests. No one does. The elder species learned that lesson generations ago, Captain. I hope humanity learns it less painfully. Before Crystal could respond, Quillick skittered away, disappearing into the diplomatic quarters maze of passages. She stood alone in the corridor, feeling the station's ambient hum through her boots and thinking about 50,000 civilians traveling toward territory the Vreskath considered theirs, beneath their interest but not beneath their sovereignty. Crystal reached the human delegation suite and found Commander Williams waiting with a datapad, his expression professionally neutral in the way that meant bad news. Sir, we have a priority communication from the Mayflower 2. Captain Rodriguez reports they've entered the terrace system without incident. New Horizon and Promise are scheduled to arrive within the next 18 hours. Any contacts? Other ships in the area? Negative, sir. All 3 systems appear exactly as surveyed. Uninhabited. No active installations. No spacecraft of any kind within sensor range. Crystal nodded, but the cold weight in her chest refused to dissipate. Instruct all 3 ships to maintain maximum sensor awareness. If they detect any vessels approaching their position, they're to broadcast peaceful intentions on all standard Concordat frequencies and withdraw immediately to predetermined fallback coordinates. Yes, sir. Williams hesitated. Captain, is there something specific we're concerned about? Everything, Crystal said quietly. We're concerned about everything, Commander. We're the newest members of a galactic community we don't yet understand, settling territory that a species with overwhelming military superiority just claimed as theirs in front of the entire Concordat. What could possibly concern us? That evening, Crystal attended a diplomatic reception in one of Apex Prime's observation lounges, a mandatory social function where representatives from various species gathered to conduct the real work of politics away from official channels. She positioned herself near one of the massive viewports, nursing a drink that Earth's xenobiologists had assured her was compatible with human biochemistry, and watched ships move through the space lanes surrounding the station. The galaxy looked so peaceful from here, so orderly. Her communicator chimed. Personal frequency, priority override. Crystal set down her drink and activated the privacy field built into all diplomatic devices before checking the message. The text was brief. From Earth's Defense Command. Colony ships overdue for scheduled transmission window. All attempts at contact unsuccessful. Investigating. Her hand tightened on the communicator, knuckles white. 18 hours since. Mayflower 2 entered the Terra system. The other 2 ships would have arrived by now. All 3 silent. Captain Zhang. The voice behind her carried the harmonic resonance of translated Vreskath. I hope you are enjoying the reception. Crystal turned to find Hegemon Prince Vraskthor approaching, his massive frame parting the crowd of smaller species like a warship's prow cutting through fog. The privacy field around her communicator would have hidden the message's content, but not the fact that she just received priority communication. Hegemon Prince. She slipped the communicator into her pocket, her mind racing through possibilities. Mechanical failure across 3 separate ships simultaneously? Coordinated technical malfunction? Or you seem troubled. Vraskthor's mandibles spread in what might have been concern, but looked more like the expression a predator might make while contemplating injured prey. Not bad news, I hope. Routine fleet communication. Crystal kept her voice level. Nothing that would interest the hegemony. Oh, but everything humanity does interests us now, Captain. You made quite the impression at today's session. Such confidence from such a young species. It's... He paused, as if searching for the right word. Remarkable. Before Crystal could respond, her communicator chimed again. Emergency override, maximum priority. The tone that meant death, or disaster, or both. She yanked it from her pocket. Privacy field forgotten. The message contained video footage, timestamped from 6 hours earlier. 3 ships, massive colony vessels designed to carry thousands of civilians and everything they needed to establish new settlements. She watched the Mayflower 2 broadcasting peaceful intentions on all concordant frequencies, while Vreskath warships closed from multiple vectors. Watched missiles and energy weapons reduce the colony ship to expanding debris. Watched the New Horizon launch life pods broadcasting emergency distress, while Vreskath vessels systematically destroyed every escape craft. Watched the Promise die last, fighting with the pathetic armament colony ships carried. Point defense lasers meant for deflecting micrometeorites, not warships, while 50,000 screams ended in silence. Crystal's hand shook. The communicator nearly fell from her fingers. Ah, Vraskthor said beside her, his tone conversational. That would be the regrettable incident in the Terra systems. A matter of trespassers in hegemony space being eliminated, according to standard protocols. I'm sure you understand. Territorial sovereignty must be maintained. Crystal looked up at the Vreskath prince, looked at the contempt in his eyes, the satisfaction in the set of his mandibles. Looked at a being who had just ordered the deaths of 50,000 civilians and wanted her to see his enjoyment of her pain. You... Her voice emerged as barely a whisper. You murdered them. We enforced our sovereign territory, Vraskthor corrected. Your ships were warned. You were warned at today's session that the Outer Terrace falls under hegemony authority. They chose to ignore that warning. The consequences are regrettable, but inevitable. Around them, other species representatives had gone silent. Crystal felt their stares, their horror and sympathy and fear all mixing into a palpable presence that pressed against her skin like physical weight. There were children aboard those ships. Crystal's hands clenched into fists at her sides. 15,000 children. Then perhaps humanity will learn a valuable lesson about respecting the established order. Vraskthor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a tone that only Crystal could hear. Your species arrived in this galaxy with pretensions of equality, Captain Zhang. with dreams of expansion and influence you have not earned. Consider this your education in galactic realities. The hegemony rules here. The elder species accept this truth. And now, perhaps humanity will accept it as well, along with our demand that Earth formally acknowledge Vresketh's sovereignty over all disputed territories. Crystal's vision narrowed to a tunnel containing only Vreskthor's face. She felt her augmented physiology flooding her system with combat stimulants, felt her muscles tensing for violence that training and discipline barely held in check. Somewhere in the rational part of her mind, she understood this was the point. The Vresketh wanted her to lash out, to attack, to give them justification for whatever came next. Instead, she forced her breathing to slow, forced her fists to unclench, forced her voice into the cold, professional tone she'd used when ordering weapons batteries to fire on enemy vessels during Earth's last internal war. "I'm calling an emergency concordate session," she said, "within the hour." "By all means." Vreskthor straightened, mandibles spreading in what was definitely amusement now. "Bring your protest before the Concordat. File your formal complaint. The elder species will express sympathy, offer meaningless condolences, and do absolutely nothing while you learn what every other member of this body already knows. The hegemony does as it wishes, and the rest of you survive by staying out of our way." He turned and moved through the crowd, which parted before him like a water around stone. Crystal stood alone by the viewport, staring at her reflection in the transparent aluminum and seeing something in her own eyes that she hadn't seen since the last time she'd ordered people into combat, knowing some would never return. Ambassador Quillick appeared at her elbow, his bioluminescent organs pulsing with distress patterns. "Captain, I cannot express. This is a tragedy beyond words." "It's a massacre beyond forgiveness," Crystal said quietly. "And it's about to become something else entirely." "Please." Quillick's antennae drooped. "I understand your grief and anger, but you must be careful. The Vresketh hegemony controls 12,000 warships across 400 systems. They haven't lost a military engagement in 3 centuries. Whatever you're planning..." "I'm not planning anything, Ambassador." Crystal looked at the Quillen, at the fear and sympathy warring in his alien features. "I'm executing protocols that humanity put in place the moment we realized what kind of galaxy we'd joined. The Vresketh think they've taught us a lesson about power and respect and our place in the cosmic hierarchy." She pulled out her communicator again, entering the authorization codes she'd hoped never to use, and sent a single encrypted message toward Earth. "Protocol Guardian authorized. Timeline accelerated. Commit all assets." What they've actually done, Crystal continued, her voice carrying a certainty that made Quillick's organs pulse faster, is answer the only question humanity needed answered before making our own choice about how this relationship was going to work. "What question?" Crystal looked out at the stars, at the vast, peaceful galaxy that had just become something else entirely. Whether we were dealing with species we could coexist with or predators that only understood strength. The Vresketh hegemony just gave us perfect clarity on that point. She turned from the viewport, heading toward the emergency session chambers. Behind her, she heard Quillick's whispered words, translated to something that might have been prayer in his native language. Captain Crystal Zhang kept walking, kept breathing, kept processing the weight of 50,000 deaths and the certainty of what came next. The Vresketh thought they'd destroyed 3 colony ships. What they'd actually destroyed was humanity's last reason for restraint. The emergency concordate session convened within the hour, but Crystal made them wait an additional 30 minutes while she stood in the human delegation suite, staring at the casualty reports scrolling across her display. 50,000 names. 50,000 lives reduced to data entries, each one representing someone who trusted humanity to keep them safe. She'd failed them. Earth's government had failed them. Every admiral and diplomat who'd convinced themselves that appearing weak would make humanity seem non-threatening had failed them. That failure ended now. Commander Williams appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Captain, the Concordat is assembled. They're waiting." "Let them wait." Crystal's voice emerged cold and flat. "Let every species in that chamber sit there, wondering what humanity's response will be. Let the Vreskath enjoy their last moments of certainty." She pulled on her dress uniform jacket, fastening each button with deliberate precision. The jacket felt heavier than usual, weighted with more than mere fabric and insignia. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, someone who'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. The walk to the assembly chamber took 5 minutes through Apex Prime's diplomatic corridors. Crystal counted each step, using the rhythm to center herself, to channel grief and rage into something cold and useful. By the time she reached the chamber's entrance, her hands were steady and her breathing was controlled. The assembly hall fell silent as she entered. Every species delegation watched her ascend to humanity's platform 3 tiers below the central dais. She could feel their emotions pressing against her like physical weight, sympathy from some, fear from others, and from the Vreskath delegation above her, smug satisfaction that made her jaw clench. "The Concordat recognizes Captain Zhang." The Serathi speaker's voice carried none of its usual condescension. Even the elder species understood that something had shifted in the chamber's atmosphere. "We have reviewed the incident reports from the outer terrace systems. On behalf of the Concordat, I express..." "The Concordat's sympathy is noted and appreciated," Crystal interrupted, her voice cutting through the chamber with military precision. "But sympathy doesn't resurrect the dead or punish the murderers. I'm here to deliver humanity's formal response to what the Vreskath hegemony has characterized as enforcement of territorial sovereignty." She activated her platform's holoprojector, filling the chamber's central display with footage from the Mayflower II's final moments. Every species watched the colony ship broadcasting peaceful intentions on all Concordat frequencies, while Vreskath warships closed in, watched missiles impact against civilian hulls, watched escape pods launching in desperate hope, while Vreskath vessels systematically targeted each one. Crystal let the footage play without commentary. The images spoke for themselves, not a military engagement, but an execution, methodical and deliberate. When the display finally faded, the chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, Vraskthor's mandibles clicked from the platform above. "A regrettable incident," the Hegemon Prince said, his tone suggesting he found nothing regrettable about it whatsoever. "As I stated earlier, Captain Zhang, your vessels were trespassing in hegemony space. They were warned. They chose to proceed. The consequences were genocide." Crystal's voice remained level, but something in it made several species delegates flinch. Premeditated murder of 50,000 civilians, including 15,000 children. War crimes under 17 separate provisions of the Concordat Charter, which the Vreskath hegemony is signatory to. "The hegemony recognizes no authority above our own sovereign judgment," Vraskthor said. "Your ships violated our territory. We enforced our borders. If you wish to characterize that as genocide, you're welcome to present your complaint to the Concordat judiciary, a process that will take approximately 7 of your years and result in nothing actionable." Crystal pulled a data chip from her pocket. Not the deployment orders from earlier, but something else. Something she'd prepared during the 30 minutes she'd made them wait. She loaded it into her platform systems and began reading, her voice taking on the formal cadence of military protocol. By authority vested in me by Earth's Unified Defense Council and ratified by every member nation of humanity's government, I hereby deliver the following message to the Vreskoth hegemony. She looked directly at Fraskthor, meeting his predatory gaze without flinching. The hegemony has 72 hours from this moment to comply with the following terms. Surrender all individuals responsible for ordering and executing the attack on human colony vessels for trial under concordant war crime statutes. Pay reparations to the families of the deceased in amounts to be determined by neutral arbitration, and issue formal acknowledgement that the attack constituted murder of civilians in violation of all recognized standards of warfare. The chamber erupted in multilingual chaos. Crystal waited for the noise to subside, then continued. Failure to comply with these terms within the specified time frame will be considered a declaration of war. Earth will respond accordingly. For a moment, just a moment, genuine surprise flickered across Fraskthor's features. Then, his mandibles spread wide, and laughter echoed through the chamber. Not the clicking amusement from earlier, but full, genuine, mocking laughter that carried contempt in every harmonic. A declaration of war? Fraskthor's voice boomed through the chamber. You? Your species? He gestured expansively at the assembled delegations. Let me ensure I understand this correctly, Captain Zhang. Humanity, with your registered fleet of fewer than 200 vessels, most of which our intelligence classifies as merchant craft with token defensive armament, is threatening to declare war on the Vreskoth hegemony, which fields 12,000 warships across 400 systems and hasn't lost a military engagement in over 3 centuries? He descended from his platform, moving with predatory grace toward Crystal's position. The other species delegates shrank back as he passed, giving the hegemon prince a wide berth. Crystal stood her ground, hands clasped behind her back in parade rest as he loomed over her platform. Let me offer you a counterproposal, Fraskthor said, his voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried through the entire chamber. The Vreskoth hegemony will generously refrain from finishing what we started in the outer terrace. We will not reduce Earth to radioactive rubble. We will not hunt down every human vessel in space and tear them apart. We will not exterminate your pathetic species from existence. His claws scraped against Crystal's platform's railing. In exchange for this mercy, humanity will formally acknowledge Vreskoth's sovereignty over all disputed territories. We'll reduce your fleet to a token home defense force of no more than 20 vessels, and will never again presume to question hegemony authority. He produced a physical copy of humanity's formal protest, the document Crystal had filed through proper concordant channels, and held it up for the entire chamber to see. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tore it in half, then quarters, then into pieces so small they fluttered to the chamber floor like snow. That is what I think of humanity's ultimatum, Fraskthor said. You have 72 hours to accept my counterproposal. Otherwise, I will personally lead the fleet that turns your homeworld into an object lesson for any other species that forgets their place in this galaxy. He returned to his platform, leaving Crystal standing alone 3 tiers below, surrounded by torn pieces of paper that represented the last attempt at peaceful resolution. The Sarathi speaker cleared his throat. The Concordat will table this matter for further discussion. Captain Zhang, perhaps cooler heads should. There's nothing to discuss. Crystal's voice carried absolute certainty. Humanity has delivered its terms. In 72 hours, the Vreskoth hegemony will either comply or face the consequences of their choice. She turned and walked from the chamber, leaving chaos in her wake. Ambassador Quillick found her an hour later in one of Apex Prime's observation lounges, standing alone before the viewport and watching ships move through space. He approached cautiously, antennae twitching with distress patterns. "Captain Zhang, I need to warn you." The Quillen's translator rendered his voice as barely above a whisper. "The Vreskat do not make empty threats. When Hegemon Prince Vraskthor said he would personally lead a fleet against Earth, he meant it literally. He will come. He will bring overwhelming force, and he will make an example of your species that the galaxy will remember for centuries." "I'm counting on it," Crystal said quietly. Quillick's bioluminescent organs pulsed in confusion. "You don't understand. The hegemony hasn't lost a military engagement in 300 years. Not because they're lucky, but because they're ruthless and powerful beyond measure. 12,000 warships, Captain. 12,000. They've crushed species with 10 times your fleet strength." "How many of those species fought back effectively?" The question seemed to catch Quillick off guard. His antennae drooped. What? When the Vreskath hegemony conquered those other species, how many of them actually inflicted significant casualties? How many made the hegemony pay for victory?" Quillick was silent for a long moment. "None," he finally admitted. "Most surrendered immediately when they saw the size of the Vreskath fleet. Those that fought were destroyed quickly, within days or weeks at most. The hegemony's reputation is such that resistance seems futile." "That's what I thought." Crystal turned from the viewport, and something in her expression made Quillick take an involuntary step backward. "Ambassador, do you know how humanity survived on Earth long enough to reach the stars?" Your world was divided, yes? Multiple nations competing? We spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other more efficiently. We fought wars that consumed entire continents. We developed weapons that could sterilize our planet 100 times over. We came within hours of extinction multiple times, and each time we survived by becoming harder, smarter, more ruthless than our enemies. Crystal's voice remained calm, almost conversational. When humanity finally unified, it wasn't because we achieved enlightenment. It was because we looked at what we'd become and realized we needed to aim that capability outward before it consumed us. She pulled out her communicator, showing Quillick the encrypted message she'd sent hours earlier. "Protocol, Guardian, wasn't created after the Vreskath attacked our colony ships, Ambassador. We put it in place 6 months after first contact with galactic civilization, when we realized what kind of galaxy we'd joined. Everything since then, our slow expansion, our weak fleet, our primitive technology, has been carefully calibrated to answer one question: which species were threats and which were potential allies?" Quillick's organs pulsed faster. You were pretending?" "We were preparing. There's a difference." Crystal looked back at the viewport, at the vast, peaceful galaxy that wouldn't remain peaceful much longer. "The Vreskath think they've taught us a lesson about power. What they've actually done is demonstrate exactly why humanity spent the last 3 years building a war machine while pretending to be harmless merchants. Captain, even if you've been hiding some military strength, the numbers don't lie. 12,000 Vreskath warships against what? A few hundred human vessels you've kept secret? That's still overwhelming odds. Ambassador Quillick, do you know what humanity learned from 10,000 years of warfare?" Crystal's reflection smiled in the viewport's surface, and there was nothing peaceful in that expression. "Superior numbers only matter if you can bring them to bear effectively. The Vreskath have spent 3 centuries fighting enemies that surrender immediately or die quickly. They've never faced an opponent that studied them, planned for them, and prepared specifically to break them." She turned back to the Quillen. "In 72 hours, The galaxy is going to learn what it means when humanity stops pretending to be weak. I'm telling you this now because the Quillen Collective has shown us more courtesy than any other species since we joined the Concordat. When this starts, I want you to remember, we're not the monsters in this story. Quillick's antennae trembled. When what starts? But Crystal was already walking away, leaving the Quillen ambassador alone with questions that would be answered soon enough. 67 hours later, the Vreskat battle group emerged from hyperspace at Earth system's edge. 30 warships, each massing over 2 million tons and carrying enough firepower to reduce a planetary surface to molten slag. Battle Group Commander Skroth stood on his flagship's bridge, watching the primitive human homeworld appear on tactical displays, and felt only contempt. "Scan the system," he ordered. "Locate their defensive positions and fleet elements." The tactical officer's mandibles twitched in what might have been surprise. "Commander, we're detecting substantial defensive infrastructure, multiple orbital fortress rings, extensive minefield networks, and 40 human vessels in formation around the planet." Skroth's contempt deepened. 40 vessels against 30 hegemony warships? Their arrogance exceeds even their foolishness. He activated the battle group's communication array, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Human vessels, this is Battle Group Commander Skroth of the Vreskath Hegemony. By order of Hegemon Prince Vraskthor, you will surrender immediately and disable your defensive systems. You have 5 minutes to comply. Failure will result in total annihilation." The response came within seconds, the voice calm and utterly professional. "Battle Group Commander Skroth, this is Admiral Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Command. 23 hours remain on humanity's ultimatum. You are ordered to withdraw from the system immediately. This is your only warning." Skroth's mandibles spread in amusement. "Admiral Chen, perhaps mathematics education on Earth is more primitive than we realized. You have 40 vessels against our 30. Your defensive platforms are stationary targets. Your minefield networks are visible on our tactical displays and easily navigated. What possible scenario do you imagine in which you survive the next hour? Commander, I strongly advise you to withdraw while that option still exists." How adorable. Skroth turned to his weapons officer. "Target their defensive platforms first. Show them what hegemony firepower means. Then, we'll dismantle their fleet piece by piece while their children watch from the surface." The battle group's weapons batteries charged, and Skroth felt the familiar satisfaction of teaching lesser species their place. This would be a story he told for years, how humanity's pathetic ultimatum ended in fire and ruin. Then, the human defensive platforms opened fire, and everything Skroth thought he understood about warfare shattered. Railgun projectiles crossed the distance at relativistic speeds, giving the Vreskath vessels no time to evade. The impacts tore through shields the hegemony had designed to withstand sustained energy weapon bombardment, because no species in 3 centuries had built kinetic weapons with such velocity. Skroth's flagship shuddered as a 2-ton tungsten rod punched clean through 3 decks, and alarm shrieked across the bridge. "Return fire," Skroth roared. "All vessels concentrate on—" The missile swarms arrived, thousands of them, each one demonstrating AI coordination that shouldn't have been possible. They didn't attack randomly, but worked together with hive mind precision, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer calculated coordination. 3 Vreskot vessels disappeared in expanding fireballs within the first minute. "Multiple impacts," the tactical officer's voice cracked with panic. "Commander, their weapon systems they're predicting our firing solutions. They're shooting down our missiles before they even launch." Skroth watched in disbelief as human point defense systems tracked incoming Vreskath ordnance with impossible accuracy. The tactical data made no sense. It looked like the humans were reading Vreskath targeting computers directly, countering every maneuver before it happened. "All vessels, evasive maneuvers. spread out, and the 40 human vessels moved as one, their formation flowing like liquid to maintain optimal firing positions, no matter how the Vreskath maneuvered. More railgun projectiles hammered the battle group, each impact precisely calculated to hit critical systems. Another 4 Vreskath ships died, then 3 more, then 5 in a coordinated strike that demonstrated tactical choreography the hegemony's finest strategists couldn't match. "We've lost 18 ships." The tactical officer's organs showed fear patterns Skroth had never seen in Vreskath physiology. "Commander, we need to withdraw." Pride warred with survival instinct on Skroth's bridge. The hegemony didn't retreat. The hegemony crushed opponents through overwhelming force. They'd never, not in 3 centuries, withdrawn from a battle against inferior numbers. But his battle group was dying, torn apart by weapons technology and tactical coordination that shouldn't have existed among a species humanity's age. He'd lost more ships in 2 hours than the hegemony typically lost in years. "All vessels," Skroth's voice emerged hollow. "Initiate hyperspace withdrawal. Now." The 12 surviving Vreskath warships fled, leaving 18 expanding debris fields and the shattered remains of hegemony invincibility floating in Earth's orbital space. Skroth's flagship was the last to translate to hyperspace, and the final thing his tactical displays showed was Admiral Marcus Chen's voice broadcasting across all concordant observation frequencies. To all species monitoring this engagement, humanity gave the Vreskath hegemony adequate warning and opportunity for peaceful resolution. They chose otherwise. Let this serve as demonstration that humanity's patience should not be mistaken for weakness. The footage reached Apex Prime within the hour, transmitted across every concordant observation channel. Crystal watched from the human delegation's suite as species that had spent 3 centuries bowing to Vreskath dominance saw their oppressors broken against Earth's defenses. Commander Williams stood beside her, reviewing casualty reports. 3 vessels lost, sir. Total casualties: 73 dead, 147 wounded. Admiral Chen is requesting authorization to... Granted. Crystal didn't need to hear the full request. She knew what came next. Tell the Admiral to proceed to Phase 2. And Commander, make sure every engagement is broadcast across all concordant channels. The galaxy needs to see this. On the primary display, Hegemon Prince Vraskthor's face appeared. A secure transmission from the Vreskath capital world, delivered directly to humanity's suite with no pretense of concordant observation. His mandibles were clenched tight, organs showing stress patterns that betrayed the calm he tried to project. Captain Zhang, your defensive preparations were more extensive than anticipated, but do not mistake survival of one engagement for victory. The hegemony fields 12,000 warships. You've bloodied a single battle group. When our full might descends on your primitive world, your ultimatum expires in 19 hours, Hegemon Prince. Crystal's voice cut through his bluster with surgical precision. I suggest you spend that time deciding whether hegemony pride is worth what comes next. The transmission ended, and Crystal turned back to the tactical displays showing Earth system. Somewhere out there, 50,000 civilians lay dead in the cold vacuum of space. They would never see their families avenged, would never know that their deaths had become the catalyst for humanity's transformation from galactic afterthought to genuine threat. She thought about Ambassador Quillick's warning, about 3 centuries of Vreskath victories, about species that surrendered immediately or died quickly. Humanity would do neither. The galaxy was about to learn the difference between a species that feared war and a species that had spent 10,000 years preparing for it. The Vreskath Armada translated from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's system, like a biblical plague made manifest. 4,200 warships, their hulls blotting out stars, their combined mass representing 3 centuries of unchallenged dominance. On the bridge of the flagship Eternal Supremacy, Hegemon Prince Fraskthor watched the primitive human homeworld appear on tactical displays and felt something close to religious satisfaction. "Broadcast on all concorded observation channels," he ordered, his mandibles spreading wide. "Let the galaxy witness what happens to species that forget their place." His communications officer activated the transmission array, and Vraskthor's image began flowing across every diplomatic frequency, every military observation channel, every news network from one edge of known space to the other. He wanted the Quillen to see this. The Sarathi, the crystalline Thex, every species that had ever considered challenging hegemony authority needed to watch what happened when arrogance met reality. "Humanity," Vraskthor's voice boomed across the void. "You were given opportunities for peaceful submission. You chose defiance. You destroyed a single battle group and convinced yourselves you were warriors rather than prey." He gestured at the tactical display showing his armada in perfect formation. "Behold the price of your hubris. 4,000 warships, each one carrying the power to sterilize your world. You have one final chance to surrender unconditionally. Refuse, and I will personally ensure that humanity becomes a cautionary tale told for the next 1,000 years." The response came within seconds, transmitted on the same public frequencies, so the watching galaxy could hear both sides of this execution. Admiral Marcus Chen's voice carried the same calm professionalism it had during the first engagement, as if facing 4,000 warships meant nothing more than paperwork requiring attention. "Hegemon Prince Vraskthor, this is Admiral Chen. You were warned. You were given every opportunity to choose peace. What happens next is entirely your responsibility." A pause, then. "Execute protocol revelation." Vraskthor's mandibles clicked in amusement. "How dramatic. What will you reveal, Admiral? Another few dozen vessels hiding behind your moon. More orbital platforms. The hegemony has faced. The space around Earth changed." Defensive platforms that had registered as simple weapon emplacements suddenly powered up with energy signatures that made the Freskoth tactical officer's organs pulse with alarm. "Commander, those platforms are reading at..." "That's impossible. Those energy outputs would require reactors massing." 3 complete fortress rings materialized into full operational status, their stealth fields dropping to reveal weapons that made humanity's earlier defenses look like children's toys. Each ring mounted hundreds of installations, and each installation carried enough firepower to gut a capital ship. Then, the real fleet appeared. Human vessels emerged from stealth positions in a perfect spherical formation around the Vreskoth Armada. Not 40 ships, not 100, but hundreds. They materialized like predators revealing themselves to surrounded prey, their positions calculated with mathematical precision so that every Vreskoth vessel faced multiple firing angles simultaneously. Vraskthor stared at his tactical displays, watching red icons representing human ships multiply across every vector. His tactical officer's voice cracked. "Commander, we're reading 837 human vessels. We're surrounded. They've put us in the kill box." "Impossible," Vraskthor breathed. "Your intelligence said fewer than 200 ships, you said?" "Our intelligence was given exactly what humanity wanted us to see." A new voice cut through the communication channels. Captain Crystal Zhang's transmission originated from Apex Prime, but it broadcast across every frequency the Vreskoth were using. She appeared on Vraskthor's display, and something in her expression made his organs clench with unfamiliar sensation, fear. Hegemon Prince, humanity learned valuable lessons from 10,000 years of warfare on our homeworld, Crystal said, her voice carrying to every ship in both fleets and every species watching across the galaxy. The most important lesson: appearing weak isn't weakness, it's strategy. You've spent 3 years watching humanity stumble through galactic politics, registering a pathetic merchant fleet, settling territory you considered worthless. What you didn't realize was that you were test subjects in an experiment designed to answer one question: which species were threats and which were potential allies? Vrask Thor's claws scraped against his command throne. We deliberately appeared exactly weak enough to tempt aggressive species into revealing themselves, Crystal continued. Congratulations, Hegemon Prince. You and your hegemony passed our test with perfect clarity. Now let me show you what humanity builds when we're not pretending anymore. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the channel. All vessels weapons free. Show them what 3 years of preparation means. The battle began, and within the first 30 seconds, Vrask Thor understood he'd led his armada into annihilation. Human weapon systems opened fire with coordinated precision that defied belief. Point singularity generators, technology that shouldn't have existed among species humanity's age, tore holes in space-time itself, and Vreskath capital ships simply folded around the gravity wells, their hulls crumpling like paper in invisible hands. Swarm drones deployed in clouds of thousands, each one operating with hive mind coordination that the hegemony's finest AI couldn't match. They didn't just attack, they adapted, learning from every defense the Vreskath employed and countering it within seconds. Energy shields absorbed directed energy weapons that should have boiled through them, the human vessel's defensive barriers demonstrating physics applications that made Vreskath scientists look like children playing with fire. And underneath it all, quantum entanglement communication systems meant that jamming was impossible. Every human ship operated with perfect real-time coordination, no matter how much electronic warfare the hegemony deployed. "Return fire!" Vrask Thor roared. "All vessels concentrate on—" A point singularity weapon hit the eternal supremacy amidships, and the flagship screamed. Metal tearing, decks collapsing, crew members dragged toward the gravity well before emergency systems finally contained the breach. 20 Vreskath vessels disappeared in the first minute, then 40, then 73 in a coordinated strike that demonstrated tactical choreography the hegemony couldn't comprehend. The Vreskath fought back with everything 3 centuries of dominance had taught them. They deployed every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every technological advantage that had crushed dozens of species. But they were fighting an enemy that had studied them specifically, prepared for them meticulously, and built weapons designed to counter every strength the hegemony possessed. Vrask Thor watched his armada die. Not quickly, not in the chaotic frenzy of desperate combat, but systematically, professionally, like surgeons dismantling a patient one organ at a time. Human vessels moved with liquid precision, maintaining optimal firing positions no matter how the Vreskath maneuvered. Their railguns fired at relativistic speeds that made evasion meaningless. Their missile swarms predicted Vreskath countermeasures before they deployed. Their point defense systems shot down incoming ordnance with accuracy that suggested they were reading Vreskath targeting computers directly. Perhaps they were. After 3 years of careful intelligence gathering while pretending to be harmless merchants, humanity probably knew more about Vreskath weapon systems than the hegemony did. 3 hours into the battle, Vrask Thor had lost over 1,000 ships. 4 hours, and the count exceeded 2,000. His tactical officer was weeping, actual biological distress fluids leaking from his organs, as he reported casualties that the hegemony hadn't suffered in 3 centuries of conquest. "Commander, we need to withdraw, we need to—" "The hegemony doesn't retreat." Vrask Thor's claws punctured his command throne's armrests. "We've never retreated. We can't—" Another point singularity weapon struck, and this time it tore through the Eternal Supremacy's engineering section. The flagship went dark, emergency power barely keeping life support online. Through the viewport, Vrask Thor watched his fleet burn. 3,000 ships now, then 3,200, numbers climbing with mechanical precision. Crystal Zhang's voice cut through the dying flagship's speakers. "Hegemon Prince, I'm offering you one final opportunity. Surrender unconditionally right now, and humanity will accept your fleet's capitulation with honor. Refuse." She paused, and something in that pause made Vrask Thor's organs clench tighter. "Refuse, and we'll demonstrate weapons we really didn't want to use. Trust me when I say you don't want to see what humanity builds when we stop exercising restraint." Vrask Thor looked at his tactical displays. 3,400 ships lost. The human fleet reported casualties of 47 vessels. 47. Against the largest military force assembled in 3 centuries. The math wasn't math anymore. It was extinction. This isn't possible," he whispered. "We're the hegemony. We rule 400 systems. We've crushed everyone who opposed us. How did you—" "Because you've spent 3 centuries fighting enemies that surrendered immediately or died quickly," Crystal said, her voice carrying finality. "Humanity spent 10,000 years fighting ourselves, learning warfare against opponents who understood tactics and strategy and preparation. When we reached the stars and saw what kind of galaxy we joined, we made a choice. Appear weak, identify the real threats, and prepare to break them completely if they proved hostile." She leaned forward, her image filling Vrask Thor's display. "You murdered 50,000 civilians, Hegemon Prince. You thought it would teach us fear. What it actually taught us was that we'd correctly identified you as an existential threat that needed to be eliminated. So we dropped the pretense and showed you what humanity builds when we're not playing at being harmless." Vrask Thor's mandibles trembled. Around his dying flagship, his armada continued burning. 3,600 ships now, then 3,700. The hegemony's invincible fleet, reduced to expanding debris and the screams of the dying. His voice emerged hollow. "I surrender. The hegemony surrenders." "All Vreskath vessels," Admiral Chen's voice carried across every frequency. "Cease fire immediately and power down weapon systems. You will be boarded and your crews taken into protective custody. Any vessel that resists will be destroyed without further warning." The battle ended 6 hours after it began. Over 3,000 Vreskath warships floated dead in space, their crews either dead or dying. Another 1,200 remained intact, but powerless, their commanders wise enough to accept surrender once their leader broke. The human fleet maintained perfect formation around the survivors, weapons still active, ready to respond to any threat. Humanity had lost 47 vessels. The Vreskath hegemony had lost its empire. The aftermath unfolded across multiple channels, broadcast throughout the galaxy so every species could witness what came next. Captain Crystal Zhang stood in the Concordat Assembly Hall, but not at humanity's platform 3 tiers below the central dais. She stood at the central dais itself, having ascended without asking permission, and no one dared suggest she move. "By authority vested in me by Earth's Unified Defense Council and witnessed by every member species of this Concordat, I deliver humanity's terms for peace with the Vreskath hegemony." Crystal's voice carried through the chamber with absolute certainty. First, Hegemon Prince Vrask Thor and his command staff will stand trial for genocide under concordant war crimes statutes. They will face justice for the murder of 50,000 civilians, she continued before anyone could interrupt. Second, the Vreskath hegemony will dismantle its imperial structure and reorganize as a federation of independent systems. Subject species currently under hegemony control are hereby granted immediate sovereignty, which humanity will guarantee with military force if necessary. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Sarathi speaker's voice carried confusion that bordered on disbelief. Captain Zhang, you're not demanding occupation. Reparations paid in territory? Subjugation of... Third, Crystal continued, reparations will be paid to the families of the deceased in manufacturing capacity and infrastructure, not lives or territory. The goal is justice for specific crimes, not collective punishment of the Vreskath people. She turned, addressing the assembled delegations directly. Humanity watched this galaxy for 3 years before the Vreskath attacked our colony ships. We saw how elder species maintain order, through domination, through fear, through crushing anyone who challenges the established hierarchy. That's not the galaxy we want to build. Admiral Chen's transmission joined hers, broadcast from Earth system where human medical vessels now moved among the Vreskath wrecks, rescuing survivors and providing aid to wounded enemy forces. We're evacuating injured Vreskath crews and offering medical treatment according to humanitarian standards humanity has maintained for centuries. These warriors followed orders. Our quarrel is with those who gave criminal orders, not with those forced to obey. The galaxy watched human vessels, the same ones that had systematically destroyed 3,000 warships, now carefully extracting survivors from debris, rendering aid without discrimination, treating former enemies with dignity that no one had expected. Ambassador Quillick's voice trembled from his platform. You're showing mercy after they murdered your civilians? We're showing the distinction between justice and revenge, Crystal said. Between warriors doing their duty and war criminals who ordered genocide. Hegemon Prince Vrask Thor will face trial. His crews will go home to their families. In his detention cell aboard a human vessel, Vrask Thor watched the proceedings through a monitor. His organs showed stress patterns that betrayed complete psychological breaking. But when a human officer entered to take his formal statement, he straightened with what remained of his dignity. I ordered the attack on the human colony ships, he said, each word heavy with finality. I gave explicit instructions to target escape pods and survivors. The genocide was my decision. Mine alone. I confess fully in exchange for one condition. My crews go free. They followed my orders. They shouldn't pay for my crimes. The officer nodded. That was already humanity's intention, Hegemon Prince, but your confession is appreciated. Vrask Thor's mandibles trembled. Why? Why show mercy to an enemy that showed you none? Because we're not you, the officer said quietly. That's the whole point. The concordate session continued, and Crystal watched as the reality settled across the assembled species. The Quillen Collective's delegation approached first, Ambassador Quillick's antennae trembling, but his bioluminescent organs showing patterns that might have been hope. Captain Zhang, the Quillen Collective formally requests alliance with humanity. We offer our manufacturing capacity, our trade networks, and our eternal gratitude for saving us from annexation. Crystal inclined her head. Humanity accepts, Ambassador. We look forward to building a genuine partnership based on mutual respect rather than fear. Other delegations followed. Subject species that had suffered under Vreskath dominance for generations, now seeing opportunity in humanity's guarantee of sovereignty. Within hours, a dozen species declared independence from the hegemony, and requested human protection while they established stable governments. The Sarathi speaker watched it all unfold, his musical voice carrying something new: uncertainty. Captain Zhang, you've demonstrated military superiority beyond anything the galaxy has seen in centuries. You could demand anything: tribute, territory, subordination. Instead, you're rebuilding the hegemony as a federation, protecting their former subjects? The goal was never conquest, Speaker. Crystal looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. Humanity learned from our own history that empires built on domination eventually collapse, usually violently. We'd rather build something that lasts, a galaxy where species cooperate because they choose to, not because they fear the alternative. She touched a control on the central dais, displaying footage from Earth system. Human vessels worked alongside Vreskath survivors, medical teams treating wounded without discrimination, engineering crews helping stabilize damaged ships so they could limp home. It was warfare's opposite, enemies becoming something else through simple acts of basic decency. We showed you what humanity builds for war, Crystal said quietly. Now watch what we build for peace. The Vreskath hegemony is over. In its place, we're going to help build something better. A federation of equals, allied with humanity, not through conquest, but through choice. The chamber fell silent. Every species processed what they'd witnessed. Overwhelming military victory followed by unprecedented mercy. Strength demonstrated not through domination, but through restraint. The Concordat had spent 3 centuries under Vreskath's shadow, and now that shadow had lifted to reveal something no one had expected. Humanity hadn't come to the stars seeking empire. They'd come seeking justice, and shown they possessed both the strength to enforce it and the wisdom to wield it carefully. Ambassador Quillick's organs pulsed with patterns his translator rendered as awe. You've changed everything. The entire galactic order in less than a week. We revealed what was always true, Crystal corrected. That strength without wisdom breeds only tyranny, and that mercy from a position of power builds more lasting peace than conquest ever could. She looked at the Quillen, at the other delegations watching with varying expressions of hope and fear. Humanity is here now. We're not going anywhere. And we're committed to building a galaxy where species like yours don't spend centuries living in fear. The session concluded, and Crystal returned to the human delegation suite, where Commander Williams waited with status reports. Medical evacuations proceeding smoothly. Vreskath crews accepting surrender terms without resistance. Subject species declarations of independence being processed through newly established diplomatic channels. Sir, Williams said quietly, Admiral Chen reports that Vreskath forces throughout their former territory are standing down. Word of the Battle of Terra has spread faster than expected. Most are surrendering immediately rather than face humanity's fleet. Crystal nodded, unsurprised. Make sure our forces treat every surrender with the same consideration we've shown here. No reprisals, no collective punishment. We're establishing precedent for how this new order functions. She moved to the viewport, looking out at Apex Prime's docking arms where human vessels now mingled with ships from a dozen species. The galaxy looked different from this angle, full of possibility rather than threat, opportunity rather than danger. 50,000 civilians had died to reveal what the galaxy truly was. Their deaths hadn't been meaningless. They'd provided the clarity humanity needed to stop pretending and start acting. The Vreskath had meant to teach humanity its place. Instead, they'd learned their own.